There are a lot of benefits to a 4-stroke outboard, but there are also some disadvantages to them as well. Everything from being more fuel efficient, quieter, smoother, and cleaner, to being way more expensive, complex, heavier, and much more. So let's talk through these advantages and disadvantages of a 4-stroke outboard engine. To begin with, the number one advantage of a 4-stroke, in my opinion, is its ability to be super fuel efficient. And in order for it to do this, it basically has to give something up. The way a 4-stroke works is it basically doubles in its stroke inefficiency compared to a 2-stroke, because a 4-stroke requires 2 rotations of the crankshaft for it to create a power stroke, meaning that our piston has to come down to allow air and fuel to come into the cylinder, and then it has to come back up, compressing that fuel and air, and then the spark plug is going to ignite when the piston is at the top. That's going to push the piston back down, which is creating the power stroke of the engine. But then the piston has to come back up to push out all the exhaust from the cylinder to allow it to come back down once again to allow more air and fuel to come into the cylinder, which is a disadvantage when it comes to power production compared to a 2-stroke. But with this, we can inject an exact amount of fuel into the cylinder based on the injected duration or the time that an injector is open, allowing fuel to be put into the cylinder. And all of this is controlled by the computer that is on the engine, which allows you to use much less fuel because it is all controlled down to the microsecond. Now with all this control, it allows you to do a bunch of stuff with the engine. A lot of manufacturers, well, basically all of them with the exception of Yamaha, have something called lean burn or advanced range optimization. And that is where the engine will alter the timing because it has all the control over everything, or it will alter when the spark plug ignites based on the relative position of your piston in its up and down motion. Now with this control, it can advance the timing and actually shorten the time that the injector is open, which will allow you to use less fuel based on specific conditions of where the engine is running at. For example, during cruising. So while cruising, the engine is actually going to change the timing and lessen the time that the injector is open, lessening the amount of fuel that is being fed to the engine without losing RPM or performance because the engine is running at such a stable RPM or speed. By doing this, you can see a 20 to 30% increase in your fuel efficiency, which is pretty ridiculous. But this is why a 4-stroke is usually almost double, if not more in some situations, in the distance that you can travel based on the fuel that you have compared to a 2-stroke. Though some 2-strokes are very fuel efficient, like the HPDIs, the Optimaxes, and some of the G2s, but the lean burning 4-strokes will still give you better range based on your fuel efficiency. Now another benefit is going to be the reduction in the noise pollution created by the engine. A 4-stroke, because of the way it operates, is just a smoother running engine. Less vibrations on the back of the boat make for a smoother ride in the boat, but also just a reduction in noise pollution overall that the engine is making. When you compare how loud a 4-stroke is to a 2-stroke, there is no comparison. You could be in the boat having all kinds of conversations without having to yell over the noise of the engine running on the back of the boat, which is a massive feature and benefit to a lot of people, especially those of you that are using a boat in a more recreational fashion. Pontoon boats, bow rider boats, dual console boats, lake boats, river boats, those that are just running around, being able to socialize in the boat, which is a big reason why most people have a boat, so they can go out and socialize and be on the water at the same time. You can enjoy it a lot more when you don't have to scream at the person next to you because of how loud the engine is on the back of the boat, losing your voice by the end of the day. But this leads us into our next feature, because with the smoothness and the quietness of the engine, you're also not burning oil, and instead the engine has an oil sump built into it where it stores oil and uses that oil to lubricate all the moving parts of the engine. And so you lose the smell of a 2-stroke, which for a lot of people out there, we actually like the smell of a 2-stroke, but for the married couples out there, the other party usually does not agree with this. So since we aren't burning the oil, you don't get that massive cloud of smoke pouring out the back of the engine or the smell of that smoke coming from the engine, which makes for a much more enjoyable cruise on the water, especially for smaller boats. Say pontoon boats, little cruise boats, or any boat where there are people closer to the engine, where you are running at a slower speed and you aren't leaving all that smoke and smell behind the boat. When you are putting around the lake or down the river, that smoke and smell is going to be lingering around the boat the entire time you're out there. And I say you kind of get used to it, but a lot of people will disagree with this. And that is why we call this a feature, because to a lot of people it is. Now, because we aren't burning the oil and creating that smoke and dumping the carbon or byproduct of burning fuel and oil out the engine into the water, the engine is a much more environmentally clean engine. Less pollution in the water, less emissions, better regulatory compliance, and all that other kind of good stuff. But a lot of people will find this to be a controversial issue where they will die on their hill, but you can let us know what you think about regulations and compliance in the comments section below. Regardless of the regulation topic, the fact that a 4-stroke is a cleaner running engine than a 2-stroke is just a fact of the functionality of the engine. You can take a 2-stroke engine, stick it in a trash can of water, run it, and then look at the water. Then take a 4-stroke engine, put it in a trash can of water, run it, and look at the water. Then you let us know which water you are going to drink. It's just how it works when it comes to the cleanness of the engine, which takes us into our next feature, being the durability and longevity that you are going to get out of a 4-stroke engine. By and large, you are going to get a lot more time and hours out of a 4-stroke engine without needing a major rebuild of the engine than you will out of a 2-stroke. There are 4-stroke engines out there that are getting up into the 10,000 hours range. Of course, these are on commercial boats like the Coast Guard or water taxis at Walt Disney World, or commercial fishermen where they're putting on 2, 3, or 4,000 hours a year, which might seem ridiculous until you think about it, because if you show up to work at 6 a.m., turn the engine on, and then it doesn't turn off until 7, 8 o'clock at night on some summer nights, maybe even later, or like the Coast Guard that might be running the engine 24 hours a day for multiple days, running a crew on a boat where they go out, come back, change out the crews, and continue back out on the boat, never turning the engine off. You can rack up thousands of hours very quickly by doing this. Where we have seen some 2-strokes get that many hours, but I think usually the most I've ever seen hour-wise out of a 2-stroke is like 6,000 hours without needing some major rebuild of some kind. So the longevity that you get from a 4-stroke engine is a massive feature, but with this comes some downsides or some disadvantages to it. For instance, because of its functionality, you have way more moving parts to the engine, which will make the engine generally weigh a lot more than a 2-stroke, which can be a problem to older boats that are running a 2-stroke or designed to have a 2-stroke. So if you replace the 2-stroke with the 4-stroke, which weighs more, it can alter the way the boat performs, which can be a problem. As well as some smaller engine instances where you have to carry the engine, like for an inflatable or a canoe or something like that. Carrying a 4-stroke that weighs 20, 30, 40 pounds more than a 2-stroke, this can be a huge deal as well. Not to mention, with all these moving parts and the electric systems that are controlling the engine, they can be considered a more complex engine. And I mean, once you learn them, they're not really that much more complex diagnostic wise, but in general, with more moving parts, they are a more complex engine. With complexity brings the cost of maintenance up. A 4-stroke generally costs a lot more to maintain than a 2-stroke engine. The simplicity of a 2-stroke makes them really cost effective when it comes to the price of filters, spark plugs, thermostats, and stuff like that, where the 4-stroke can get up to double the price when it comes to a standard service, with the replacement of the oil as well as the added cost of other filters and the higher price components like the thermostats and the spark plugs compared to those same parts on a 2-stroke engine. And since we're talking about the price, the cost or purchase price of a 4-stroke is usually much higher than that of a 2-stroke, though a 2-stroke is really not available in a lot of places around the world. Like, say if you live in the United States, this really isn't a choice. It's not like you can go out and buy a brand new 250 horsepower 2-stroke outboard, so there really isn't a discussion here when it comes to the purchase price of a new engine and a 2-stroke. But lastly, you can have a little bit less efficiency when it comes to the power production of the engine, talking about the power to weight ratio of the engine, because a 2-stroke creates power with every rotation of the crankshaft. it is generally considered a faster engine and more powerful because the 4-stroke has the added rotation of the crankshaft as well as the other moving parts like the camshaft, the valves, and the springs and all that other stuff, which makes it a less efficient engine, and you could see a loss in hole shot and top end speed based on this loss in efficiency of the engine. But you let me know what I missed when it comes to the benefits or disadvantages of a 4-stroke outboard engine.